friends, this is Worldmaker Books, and I'm Joy, and we are going to get on with chapters 11, 12, and 13 of Black and White by Mark Wandrey. We have this video and one more, and we will have finished the second book in our Read to Me series, basically. So here we go. Chapter 11. Templemere, Planet Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Tolo Arm, May 10th, 2038. Terry barely got to his class on time. Dr. Patel taught biology and life sciences, but hadn't arrived yet when Terry entered. In these classes, they shared time with the middle school-aged kids, so in addition to the 4 other high schoolers, there were 5 younger kids. They all looked up when he came in. He immediately caught Katrina's eye and smiled. She half smiled back, which caused him to pause. He glanced out the door and saw no sign of Dr. Patel, so he went over to Katrina and his friends. "What's up? You didn't notice all the doctors weren't around at breakfast?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "I was working late, so I skipped breakfast. What do you think is going on?" "No clue," Dan said. Taiki shook his head to show he didn't know either, while Colin just shrugged. The middle school students at their own table glanced at the older students nervously. The adults had been scrupulous since arriving on Hoarfrost at maintaining a daily schedule in order to give the children a grounding in routine. Some of the much younger kids were having regular counseling sessions to help them deal with their new environment. He sat with his friends and listened while they gossiped about what might be happening. To fill the time, Terry went back to his slate and the files he'd been working on when he'd given in to sleep the previous night. As soon as he looked for them, he had an epiphany. The Selroth program had set aside one of the extractors to create a storage depot, which meant they'd always intended to hide all the resources, maybe even for hundreds of years, which led him to the communications protocol of the original program and his own slate's communications log. Betrayed by his own beloved slate, it had used Templemere's own communications system to quietly send a signal to the surface station, which in turn— "Oh, shit," he cursed. "Terry!" Katrina chastised him. "I gotta go," he said, snatching up his slate and running for the door. "What's going on?" Katrina yelled after him. But he was already out the door and running out of the building. Simulated sunlight shone from the dome above as he ran across the open space, past the swimming pool, to the central building tower that contained Templemere's command center. He saw only a few people between the school and the command center. Inside, he went immediately to the second floor where the ops room was. As soon as he reached the second floor, he found all the ranking staff of the colony, former directors of the Institute. "We're in trouble," he blurted. "Terry," Doc said from where he stood by a Tri-V display. "What?" "You have to listen to me," he said, and held up his slate. "The Selroth are coming back." "Son," his mom said, "how did you find out?" "It was in the program." Wait, you know?" "Yes," she said. "We haven't made any announcements yet, so how did you know?" "It was in the program," he said, then quickly explained how the operating system from the extractors, once reassembled, contained a hidden trigger that sent a signal off-planet. "I could have locked down my slate, but I didn't know there was a reason to," he said, with a shake of his head. "I messed up again." "No," Tina said, standing next to Doc. "If you hadn't done it, one of us would have eventually. It's not your fault." "But how do you know? Did someone else activate the signal?" "No," Doc said. "The Selroth are landing at the power station up on the surface." He pointed to the ops room Tri-V. On it was a surface fusion plant floating in the melted ice. On the landing pads squatted multiple ships. They didn't look like commercial vessels. Each one had stubby, swept wings and a turret on its back. He'd learned about those kind of craft in MST, dropships. Designed to transport mercs from space to a planet's surface, dropships were balanced between combat capabilities, cargo capacity, and the ability to quickly drop from orbit to a planet's surface. It was a capability human mercs greatly coveted. "What are we going to do?" he asked. "The Selroth don't negotiate well," Doc said, and put a hand on his shoulder. "My team can fight, but we're pretty badly outnumbered." On the viewer, one of the transport's doors were open, and huge crabs were skittering out. "Great, we've got crabs," Piano said. Tina elbowed him hard in the ribs. "There are at least 3 platoons," Tina said, examining the images. "Assuming they don't have even more in orbit, of course." "They're tough bastards, too. The Selroth came loaded for Ugar," Doc quipped. Terry gave a half chuckle at the pun. "First thing they did was shut down our link to the satellites in orbit," Tina said. "They've got backdoor codes to everything." "Did the Islians set us up?" his mom asked Doc. "I doubt it," he said. "They weren't happy with this Selroth when they up and ditched the project. I think the Selroth left because they saw potential here. A lot of potential. So they hatched a plot to convince the Islians there wasn't much here, while the truth was the vents are a rich score. They set the extractors to automatic and left. They were probably planning to come back eventually, but the program was a safety switch in case their plot was discovered. And I triggered it, Terry said. We triggered it, Doc corrected. Did you find anything else in the files from the extractor? Something that could help us? They sent it there on purpose to set up a depot to store the other extractor's hull, Terry said. It looks like there's a facility under the extractor. I don't know what kind, but I know it's suitable for air-breathing life. Did the Selroth make it? Doc asked. What's it for? I don't know either of those things, Terry said. I only just figured some of it out. Doc nodded in understanding and turned to Terry's mom. We have to get the kids out of here. What? She said. Where do we take them? The surface is our only way to get off, and without a way to call for help, we're trapped. To the place Terry found, Doc said. She shook her head, and he held up a hand. No, listen, as long as the children are here, we have no ability to fight or negotiate. The Selroth will all be mercs. They don't care about civilians. To them, they're just a liability for our side. No, she said. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to stay here. Doc's mercs nodded in agreement. He's making sense, Dr. Clark, Dr. Janig said. The others were reluctantly nodding as well. The Orcas can help protect us, Terry said. Send some of the staff with them, then, she said. In all frankness, Madison, I'll probably need them to help fight. The Selroth might be coming to kill us and take the resources, and the presence of Zictal troopers adds weight to the theory. It's what I would do, Toothpick said. On the display, Selroth in heated suits were supervising Zictal unloading submersible craft into the water, one per dropship. Doc pointed. We don't have a lot of time. Some of the big crabs were slipping into the water. This plan is crazy, she said, shaking her head. No, just desperate, Doc replied. He turned to Terry. You can operate the submersible? It's a lot like the mini-sub? Quite a bit, yeah, Hancho said and nodded. I can get you up to speed in just a few minutes. A few minutes might be all the time we have, Doc said. Madison, you're in charge. Make the call. Get the kids out of here or give the oldest ones guns. He looked right at Terry when he said the last. It was exactly the push she needed. Get ready to evacuate the kids, she said, then grabbed Terry in a fierce hug. She kissed him on the forehead and turned his face up to hers. You stay out of this, you hear? Yes, Mom. I'm serious. No matter what you hear, do not come back until at least 2 of us tell you it's safe. Do you understand? He nodded, eyes big. I'm going to tell the cetaceans what's happening and have them go with you. Doc scribbled on a piece of notepaper and handed it to him. This is the only frequency we'll transmit on. Ignore everything else. Like your mother says, only come back if at least 2 of us, he gestured around the room, tell you to. I will. Hancho, activate the sub and get him up to speed on the controls. He moved next to the cowboy hat-wearing merc, said something in his ear Terry didn't hear, and passed the man something. Terry, get your dive gear and head for the subdock. The rest of you, let's round up all the kids, some supplies, and haul ass. On the display, a crowd of Selroth were trotting out of the dropship and into the submersible. A group of Zictal submerged. Time's a-wasting. Terry ran all the way to the moon pool to collect his dive gear. He had it all stuffed into a duffel, including extra rebreathers and batteries, when he saw the feeding cart and its milk synthesizer. Damn it, he said, and rushed into the equipment room. He unloaded the biggest cart he could find, shoved his duffel onto the bottom shelf, and rolled it out into the main room. Hancho was standing impatiently next to the submarine when Terry came huffing and puffing through the submarine lock door, pushing the equipment cart, laden with a massive pile of equipment. Kid, what the hell? He asked when he saw. Pokale will starve without food, Terry explained. He's not old enough for fish alone. He'd just gotten the cart up to the sub when the door opened again. Tina, Toothpick, Piano, Hutch, and Peto were escorting in all the other children. The youngest, a 5-year-old girl, was being helped along by her older brother. A few adults were there carrying babies, and a couple looked pregnant. He'd known there were pregnancies among the colonists, though not how many. Terry's friends Dan, Colin, Taiki, and of course Katrina were helping. Each of the children had a bag with them, some several. He was surprised to see the mercs wore body armor and carried various weapons. When did they have time to gear up, he wondered, and lugged a crate onto the sub. Forget that shit, Hancho urged. I can't leave it, Terry insisted. Hancho snarled another curse, then gave a sharp whistle. The mercs looked up. He pointed to the cart, made a whirling gesture over his head, and pointed to the sub. Piano gave a thumbs up. It'll get done. Now come on, damn it. Terry followed him into the submarine. He took him into the craft and forward to the cockpit. The controls resembled a mini-sub in the same way a turkey sandwich resembled a living turkey. Oh, wow, he said at the dizzying array of gauges, controls, computer screens, and instruments. Don't worry about it, Honcho said, squeezing down to fit through the driver's hatch next to Terry. He had to remove his cowboy hat, something which seemed to annoy him. Hop into the driver's seat and I'll give you a crash course. Can you not say crash? Terry asked. Honcho laughed and mussed his hair. Compared to stabbing a dinosaur in the eye while it's trying to eat you, this ain't nothing. I was scared to death, Honcho, Terry admitted. I didn't know what I was doing. Being brave doesn't mean you can't be scared, kid. It just means you can act when most people wouldn't. You've got the knife Toothpick gave you? Sure, Terry said and looked down. He'd strapped his dive belt on before taking the rest of the gear. The knife rested there in its sheath. Good, Doc said to give you this. He held out a holster. Inside was one of the Merc's custom-printed laser pistols. Oh, holy cow, Terry said, staring at the weapon. Don't go all soft on me now, kid, Honcho said and shoved it at him. Terry took it and Honcho drew his own. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire, he said. And Terry noted how the man held it with his finger along the side of the trigger button. Safety here, magazine release here. You got 12 shots, then reload. 1 extra magazine in the holster, got it? Yeah, Terry said, but I've never shot a gun before. We all start sometime. If you need it, shit's gone sideways. Selroth are tough, but not too tough. Aim center mass. He patted his chest, then stomach. 2 shots each. Remember, underwater it's only good for a couple meters, got it? Sure, Terry said, and put the gun in his lap. You'll do fine. Now, here's how you run this beast. Halfway through Honcho's crash course, Terry grabbed his slate from the carry bag and began recording and making notes. The older man was right. The necessary controls to operate the submarine weren't overly complicated. However, there were hundreds of additional controls that were complicated. Messing with many of them could cause major problems. He also needed to keep an eye on a whole series of monitors to avoid needing some of the controls he wasn't learning how to use. That's about it. Got it, kid? I'll manage, Terry said, and showed Honcho the notes and recordings. In the 10 minutes it had taken Honcho to explain, Terry had taken full panoramic images of the control systems and had furiously noted everything Honcho had mentioned. Damn, that's pretty good, he pointed to a note. Put a note on this one, he said, and pointed to another. If you try to use the dump ballast control to equalize buoyancy, you'll be on an express trip to the surface. Oh, crap, Terry said, and changed the notes. Anything else? Honcho finished scanning and shook his head no. All good. He glanced at his watch. You still have 30 minutes. Honcho, Terry heard Doc's voice over the man's miniature earpiece radio. He reached up and tapped the radio. Go, boss. Fish is in the water. Get the kid wet inside of 10 minutes. Roger that, Honcho said, and turned to Terry. You hear? Okay, I'm going topside to make sure the sub's 100%. I'll be back in 5. Then he was gone, leaving Terry alone and scared. He spent a minute going through the various checklists of function, fusion reactor power output, hydrogen storage, oxygen generator, main pressure pumps, backup pumps, and on and on. You okay? He turned his head and saw Katrina crouching in the hatchway of the small cockpit. Oh, hey, yeah, kind of, he said, not realizing he was shaking his head. Do you need help? Yes, he was about to say he didn't know where she would fit when she slid in and made a seat appear out of nowhere. It flipped down from under a console. He hadn't known it was there, but she'd apparently noticed it. What can I do? Terry put his slate where she could see it and quickly showed her the various systems, paying particular attention to things he'd been told to avoid upsetting. At first he was unsure whether Katrina would be of any real help, but after less than a minute his concern was gone. He'd known since they met how intelligent she was, and he should have remembered. She jumped in immediately, taking over some functions from him. Honcho returned and stopped in the hatch when he found the 2 kids busily working together, talking through the various functions and how they were delegating them. Terry didn't notice him for several seconds. You kids got this? Yeah, Terry said, a little surprised. Okay, he said, and left them in charge. They both settled headsets in place, checking comms functions, and got ready. Terry, you there? Doc called over the headset. Yes, sir, all set, he replied. I hear you got Katrina up there helping you? Terry glanced over at her and she winked, making him smile as Doc replied. Honcho said you got it squared away, so I'm only going to tell you to keep your eye on the objective. Keep those kids safe. A lot of the parents are freaking out about this, but despite your screw-up, I have faith you can do this. Thanks, we won't let you down. You have 29 kids on board and 6 adult women. All are either parents of babies or pregnant women. We'll try to send the other sub if we have time, but nobody else has experience operating them, and we're going to try and put up as much of a fight as possible. Don't forget, you don't come back unless 2 of us call. There's enough supplies on there for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you push it. Got it, Terry said, shaking slightly with pent-up nerves. Help him out, young lady, Doc added. Yes, sir, I will. No time for romance. Terry felt his cheeks burning at his words. Opening the lock, you are cleared to dive. Roger that, Terry said, swallowed hard, and used the lateral thrusters to push them slightly away from the dock. Dive 5 meters, he said. 5 meters, Katrina repeated. The sound of whooshing air through the hull echoed as the sub's ballast tanks took on water, and they slipped below the surface. Through the ball-shaped cockpit glass, he had a wonderfully panoramic view underwater of the submarine pen as he oriented himself on the slowly opening iris valve lock. We're really leaving them? Katrina asked. My mom and dad, your mom, everyone? Just for now, Terry said. He'd promised Doc he wouldn't come back until 2 of the leaders contacted him, no matter what. The truth was, he'd come back as soon as all the children were safe and his friends had them under protection. Honcho had skipped over the vessel's defensive systems during his instructions. Terry clearly saw them, though. The submarine was armed with both close-in defense lasers and torpedoes. It could make a significant difference in the defense of Templemere. He fully intended to return and help in the fight. Just about everyone he knew was in the big ruby dome. He wouldn't abandon them. Carefully managing the sub's engines, he moved them forward and through the lock as soon as it was open. Godspeed, Doc called over the radio. Everyone sends their love. No more transmissions until we call you. Good luck, Terry replied, and Katrina turned off the transmitter. Then Terry turned on the rear passenger area PA. We're away, he said. Everyone sent their love to us. We'll be fine. Despite his words and the sound of the sub's various systems, he could hear crying from the rear. He swallowed back his own fear for his mother, Doc, and everyone else. Outside, a pair of bottlenoses shot into view and circled the submarine, while a single orca appeared, the big male named Bick. Who in 10 fish? Bick asked over the hydrophone. Terry, he replied. Did my mom tell you what's happening? Yes, she tell, he replied. Pod going to machine. We meet. Lead you. Thanks, he said. Outside, the big orca took up a position in front of them as he matched course and speed. The 2 bottlenoses raced ahead to scout. They sailed on, and Templemere's lights were quickly swallowed by the dark ocean depths. The sub continued on, slowly descending toward the extinct volcano where they'd found the excavator. Terry took out the slip of paper with the frequency Doc had given him and typed it into the radio. The frequency was active and multiplexed with a video feed as well. A screen came alive with an image inside the dome. Maybe we should go back, Katrina said. Terry was thinking about what to say when he saw movement. Zictal shapes were on the outside of the dome, although the distance made them appear tiny. There was a flash, and the dome he'd thought of as invulnerable cracked. A huge chunk exploded inward, leading a tidal wave of water. In an instant, the camera was hit and knocked out. Templemere was destroyed. Chapter 12. Volcanic Valley, Planet Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Tolo Arm, May 11th, 2038. The conditions inside the modified extractor were unchanged since Terry and Katrina had last visited it. Doc and his team had explored it afterward, but nothing more had been done. Terry numbly piloted the submarine to the site, then docked at the same lock he'd come through before. He sat in his seat for long minutes, trying to decide how to explain what he'd seen to his passengers, only to find out they already knew. The monitor in the cargo area had faithfully shown the same images. Eventually, one of the adults came forward and asked if it was okay to open the lock. Terry forced himself to concentrate on the responsibility he'd taken on and went aft to verify it was safe. It was, and he equalized the sub's pressure with the extractors before opening the heavy submarine door. First, heaters were moved in to warm the frigid interior. Then portable cots were moved into the larger interior spaces of the extractor, and living spaces were set up. The adults took charge of the kids, leaving Terry to battle his own personal demons. Doc was dead, his mom was dead, all the doctors and researchers of the Institute were dead. He was alone with the younger children and a handful of adults who weren't part of the Institute's personnel. There was nowhere to go, and no chance of rescue. In short, they were dead once the food ran out. The submarine would provide air and water for months, thanks to its small fusion reactor. It took Katrina's level-headedness to remind him they were in an ocean full of fish, and the cetaceans could provide them all they needed, so they could survive for quite some time. He was embarrassed that Katrina seemed to be dealing with it better than he did, so he'd asked her how she was doing so well. I'm just not thinking about it right now, she'd admitted. Survive first, think later. That was the right way to think, so he did his best to emulate her. Somehow he managed to get to sleep. When morning came, he felt no less heartbroken, but he had more resolve. Survive first, think later. Cray, are you out there? He called to the orca. Cray here, Pod here. We think the habitat was destroyed, he told the orca leader. We know, he replied. How? We hear long way, the orca explained. Terry nodded. The cetaceans had sonar sending and hearing. The dome's implosion had probably been detectable for 100 kilometers. Can you have the bottlenoses scout? Already look. Full water. Big crabs. Strange things there. Terry sighed. Katrina was sitting next to him, back in the sub, so they could talk with the orcas. Cray swam into view, looking at him with a big eye. What kind of strange things? He asked the orca leader. Like wardens. Bigger. Breathe water. Cellroth, Terry said. They bad? Cray asked. They and the crabs killed all our people, Terry said bitterly. Then we kill, Cray said. No, Terry said. Cellroth kill wardens. Crabs kill wardens. Pod kill them. I wish you could, Terry said. We all do. But Cellroth and crabs have weapons that can kill you. Some. We kill more them. How do I explain this so they don't get themselves killed? He asked Katrina. We need you, Katrina said. We need you to get food and protect us. Young wardens need stay safe? Yes, Terry said, pouncing on Katrina's brilliant idea. If you go to fight, the Cellroth or crabs may find us and kill us, too. We protect now, kill later. Thank you, Terry said. Need fish? We have enough food now. Please ask Sunrise Pod to watch for enemies nearby. Kill them? If they come near here, yes. Terry, Katrina said, without a chance to talk? They killed everyone and didn't give us a chance to talk, Terry said sternly. Your mom and dad are dead. My mom is dead. Everyone is dead. She looked away. He felt a little bad for being so rough on her, but her feelings of loss were slowly changing to anger. The idea of taking the sub with the orcas and killing every single alien sounded pretty damn good. But what about everyone else? They had the one sub. Either the Cellroth or Zictal would find them and kill them too, or they'd slowly starve. No, he had to stay and help take care of them. Doc had said something once. As long as you're alive, there are always options. Maybe he'd come across a way to even the score. Later. We watch. Cellroth, crab, come, we kill. Thank you, Cray. The big orca swam away to tell the others, and left Terry to decide what to do next. His other friends and the adults organized and began to bring order to their meager living space. While the inside of the extractor was larger than the sub, it wasn't spacious. As kids do, the younger ones began to explore and found a pair of bathrooms. They were the Cellroth style, the same ones they'd found when first occupying Templemere, but they were usable. Sanitation would have been a problem if they only had the one tiny toilet in the sub. It was one more thing off their plate. The adult women with them took the kids under their care, freeing Terry and his friends to work on other problems as best they could. Many of the children were despondent, especially the ones old enough to fully understand what had happened. The ones older than 5 and younger than 10 were the ones who didn't fully grasp that their parents were dead, and thus running around exploring. It was late in the afternoon when one of them came back, reporting they'd found a door that wouldn't open. Terry hadn't asked them not to explore. They needed something to keep their minds off what had happened at Templemere. However, he had told them under no circumstances should they open a locked door. Show me where it is? He asked the young boy, who nodded. I'll be right back, Terry told Katrina, who'd become his co-leader for the group of survivors. She nodded, and he followed the eager young boy. He'd found an access everyone else had missed, a door that appeared to be a panel cover. When pulled, it opened like a door to reveal a ladderway. Wow, he said. Good job. Thanks, the boy said, and set off down the ladder. Terry fell in close behind. They traveled downward further than Terry had expected. After a minute, he began to wonder how far they were going, and if the boy was playing a prank on him. Then they reached the bottom. The ladder emerged into a circular chamber that looked like it had once contained piping or hydraulic equipment. He couldn't be sure which. A single door was set into the floor, a pressure type with a circular handle and glass gauge. Terry knelt next to the door and examined the gauge. It showed more pressure on the other side than in the chamber. It was a damn good thing the boy hadn't tried to work the lock himself, as it swung inward. He couldn't tell the pressure difference, but even a few psi would be enough to explosively launch the boy across the chamber and flood it in seconds, perhaps endangering everyone above them as well. Good job, he told him. Try to find something to put a warning on the door above us, okay? You bet, Terry, the boy said, and set off back up the ladder. Terry spent a few more minutes examining the chamber, wondering what it might be for and what it used to do. Looking closer at the door, he noticed electronic connections, so he took out his slate and checked for wireless connectivity. He found it. Well, okay, he said. Let's see what we can see. He allowed the slate to link and opened protocol to receive data, and instantly a huge file began loading. A really huge file. Whoa, Terry said, and activated the slate's protective program. A second later, he recognized the type of file, the same strange 3D structure he'd downloaded before from an extractor. He quarantined it and allowed the file to complete downloading, then began examining the communication protocol attached to the connection. It was all inbound to the extractor's computer link. Nothing was outbound. To top it off, his slate tagged the new program as hostile. Whatever was on the other side of the pressure door had just tried to take over his slate. Terry rejoined Katrina and the others in the overcrowded living area they'd made. He quickly confirmed all the kids were back, and none of the others had found anything like the area he'd been investigating. Next, he explained what he'd found to Katrina. "Do you think it's a Cellroth thing?" she wondered. "No," he said. "The Cellroth program was supposed to make this extractor set up a storage location for them to get the minerals later. This is different." He scratched his chin and shook his head. "It's almost as if something else has taken control of it." He took his slate out again and linked with the extractor's computer. He had to be careful now, knowing hostile programs were buzzing around. At least the dangerous ones were all extremely large, so he set his slate's buffers to the slowest setting. That should keep an attack from easily succeeding. Working for a minute, he found the extractor's subprogram which controlled storage. It showed a small amount of minerals. There should have been hundreds of tons. Had someone else found the cache and taken it out from under the Cellroth's noses? It didn't seem likely. Then what was happening? "Terry?" "Yeah, Katrina," he replied on the headset radio. "Trouble. You better come." Terry arrived back at the living area less than a minute after her call. She had a little slate from the submarine and was huddled with the other seniors. Its Tri-V was showing camera views from the submarine, part of the sub's hull, and dark water. "What's going on?" he asked. "Watch," Dan said. A second later, there was a bright, strobe-like flash, then another. Suddenly, a bottlenose came racing toward the camera at breakneck speed. It was Wiki Wiki. In moments, she was within hydrophone range. "Terry! Terry! Crabs!" "Calm down, Wiki Wiki," he said. "Tell me what happened." "Chaw spot crabs. We watch, like you say. Then looking. One come this way. Chaw kill. Crunch. Taste funny." "Jesus, did they eat the alien?" Taiki asked. Terry shrugged. "Maybe. What are those flashes?" "More crab. Look." To Terry's astonishment, the slate began to receive an image file. There was little doubt he was seeing the POV of a bottlenose dolphin swimming at incredible speed through the water. Suddenly it turned and crashed into a Zictal. The crab's carapace shattered and a cloud of blue blood flowed out into the dolphin's headlamps. It looked to the side and another dolphin was trying to evade a second crab. The alien had a harness welded to its back with weapons and propulsion. A bright beam of light lanced out and pierced the dolphin, who jerked and stopped swimming. "How are you showing me this?" he asked. The bottlenoses' harnesses only had rebreathers and lights. There were no cameras. "Think save," Wiki Wiki said. "Who was hit?" Katrina asked. "Chaw," she replied. "Chaw dead." "Terry," the hydrophone relayed the sound of Cray's distinct voice. "We drop rocks, we shoot sonar, not get close or light burn." "It's called a laser," Terry explained. "Stay out of range. Be careful, they probably have other weapons that can hurt from a distance." "Shot metal fish at me," Wiki Wiki said. "Torpedo," Colin suggested. Terry nodded, then pressed the mute. "I don't know what to tell them to do," he admitted. "They want to fight," Taiki said. "Let them." "It wouldn't be fair," Katrina said, shaking her head. "They don't know how weapons work. They'll get killed." "She's right," Dan agreed. "You remember the video Doc showed us in MST? The aliens have been doing this a very long time. They're good at it." "I'm also more than a little worried about the feed Wiki Wiki sent," Terry said. "Why?" Katrina asked. "It was a pin plant recording. They've never done that before, and we had no idea they'd figured it out." "That's good, right?" Katrina said. "I mean, they're understanding how they work." "But why haven't they been telling us about it? Dr. Orsage has been carefully keeping tabs on them and their pin plants. He does routine downloads all the time to make sure they're not having problems. Though he said he's mostly watching the orcas because the bottlenose weren't showing any unusual traits like the orcas had, he thought. Now I can't ask him what this means because he's dead." Terry shook his head. Too many things going on all at once. He was only 13 years old. He couldn't be responsible for all of this. He gave a little sigh. "I miss Mom." "Terry want us kill?" Cray asked. On the screen, an orca swam into view. It was Ki'i, the former leader of the wandering pod before the two pods merged. The big male orca had half a dismembered Zictal in his mouth and was flipping it around as he swam, casually crushing the alien's armored shell. Damn, he thought. They don't care that this is life or death. Doc had said, "I've found when it comes to life, you either stand or you fall." He didn't have the luxury to fall. Too many were depending on him. "They're coming here," Terry said. "They must be. They might not know the exact location, but they know the area." "What do we do?" Katrina asked. "We need to go somewhere they can't find us." "Where?" Dan asked. "Yeah, where can we go that they can't find us?" Colin asked. Terry unmuted the hydrophone. Cray? What Terry want? Can you lead the crabs away? Lure them? Not kill? No, he repeated. Just give us time. We do. Okay, he said to his friends. We'd better hurry. Get your dry suits from the sub. I need some other stuff, too. The others looked at each other, then got up to follow him. I think we might have an option. Where does this go? Katrina asked, examining the hatch. I have no clue, Terry said, above. He was busy setting the emergency pressure door in the ladderway above the hatch, part of the equipment in the submarine Hancho had mentioned offhand during his quick lesson. Basically an inflatable ring with powerful adhesives and a double zipper similar to a spacesuit. It was meant to create an airlock to facilitate evacuation or boarding of a damaged submarine. Hancho had said he wouldn't need it, but it had turned out he was wrong. It took Terry a few minutes to figure it out. Luckily, there were instructions in the duffel holding it, and he also found a demonstration video on his slate. Once he understood the principle, the rest was easy. Have you got the relief valve in yet? He asked them. Almost, Colin said. He and Dan were both holding the drill while Taiki made sure it stayed on point. Part of the emergency pressure door, it was a drill with a pressure-relieving valve and pump attached. Once the hatch was in place, you'd drill the valve into an existing door to equalize pressure. Terry was gambling that the higher pressure on the other side didn't mean it was underwater. He was hoping it led to a lower area of the extractor, somewhere the alien mercs couldn't easily follow them. Naturally, a lower area would be under higher pressure. The strange computer files seemed to originate down there too, so his escape plan could also possibly provide some answers. There was a pinging sound from the drill, and it suddenly stopped. They all looked at the mechanism in alarm until Colin examined its simple controls. We're good, he said. It's installed. He attached the little manifold that came in the kit, and they finally got a look at the pressure differential between their side and the other. Difference is only 44 kPa and no water. Rebreathers, Terry said, and they pulled their dry suit hoods on and activated rebreathers. Let's equalize and see what's on the other side. Because the tap Colin installed was small, it took several minutes to equalize their side's pressure with the other. Finally, the pressure glass showed green, so it was safe to open the pressure door. You sure about this? Katrina asked. No, Terry admitted, and spun the wheel on the door. It gave a clank, and he heaved it up and open. The hatch contained springs, so the weight wasn't as much as he expected. As soon as it was open, he stepped back and stuck a hand into the bag he'd slung over his dry suit-covered shoulder. The grip of the laser pistol Hancho had given him felt reassuring, though nothing came out of the hatch after them. He'd already decided to go down, regardless of what came out. He removed the holstered pistol and clipped it onto his belt. A laser pistol, Dan said. Perceptive, Terry said. Where did you get it? Katrina asked. Doc gave it to me just before we left Templemere. Why? Taiki asked. Terry made an expansive gesture. Are you serious? He leaned over the open hatch, shining his helmet light down inside. A seamless tunnel went down for a meter, then gave way to rough-hewn stone. The extractor was connected to the extinct volcano. However, there was no way to get down. No ladder, Katrina said, echoing his thoughts. How much rope do we have? He asked them. Between the 5 of them, they had a total of 30 meters. It was quickly tied together and secured. I'm going down, he said, and cinched the bag tighter. But you don't know what's down there, Katrina said, her eyes wide behind her mask. I know what's outside waiting for us, he said. He didn't want to come out and say he was desperate, but he was. Even if they all climbed back into the sub and headed out, the Selroth and Ziktal had the advantage. They were armed and in their element. Whatever was below might at least provide a place to hide for a while. Time gave them options. Terry had gone mountain climbing a few times on Molokai, so he knew how to rappel, but now he didn't have the proper climbing gear. He was forced to improvise, wrapping the line around an arm and his cybernetic leg, then using his real leg to control the descent. After the first 5 meters, he was glad Hoarfrost's gravity was less than Earth's. The tunnel only went another meter before he reached the bottom. He was glad, too. All the swimming he'd been doing to get back in shape after months in a coma was paying off, but his arms were still getting tired. Setting foot on the ground, he panned the helmet lamps around. The space looked like a partially collapsed lava tube. He'd seen plenty of those in Hawaii as well. He also noted in his heads-up display that the air temperature was up 13 degrees. Still below freezing, but a noticeable increase. Looks like this volcano isn't extinct after all, he thought. Terry played the rope out and continued to examine the space. One direction went only a couple of meters and ended in crumbled rock. The other direction angled downward and continued. He looked up and examined the tunnel he'd come down. It was rough, yet still looked purposeful. There's a tunnel down here, he said over the radio. I'm going to follow it and see where it goes. You're breaking up a bit, Colin said. I got you. Be careful. Roger that, he said, and set out. He detached one of the lamps from his helmet so he could use it separately. There was a lot of crumbled rock on the ground, and the floor itself was cracked in places, making for treacherous footing. His cybernetic leg made things a little more challenging, too. The tunnel went for 20 or 30 meters, then it suddenly opened up into a wide, low-ceilinged chamber that his lights couldn't illuminate the far side of. It had the look of a volcanic lava-formed cave like many in Hawaii. He also smelled seawater. Terry spent a few minutes playing his lights around, examining the cave. It was fairly featureless, with a sandy floor and a few scattered rocks, the biggest the size of a trash can. After a few minutes, he found the source of the seawater odor, a large pool that took up half the cave. He moved closer and investigated the pool. It was deep enough to swallow his light. He stood and looked around. The chamber ended at the other side of the pool, the roof slanting down until it met the floor. End of the road. However, as he walked back around the pool, he realized there was ample space in the room. He used the flashlight again in the water and saw movement. Checking his watch, he saw he'd only been gone a few minutes. "Might as well check it out," he said. Since he was already wearing his dry suit to stay warm in the cavern, all he needed to do was properly seal the helmet and verify the gloves and boots were also sealed. Flipping the rebreather on, he set his bag aside, sat on the edge of the pool, and slid in. He felt the cold through the neoprene material of the suit stinging his skin. Instantly, the dry suit's heater kicked into high gear, the extra hot airflow making the suit billow out from his skin slightly and alleviating the cold's bite to some degree. He waited while the heater caught up, then submerged. He kept one of the lamps in his hand as he dove down and examined underwater. He set his suit's buoyancy for a slight negative and slowly sank into the dark water. After only a few meters, he realized the pool was actually an extension of the lava tube he'd been in all along. Small native fish swam around him, their feelers occasionally contacting his suit, causing them to race away from the strange contact. If there's fish, there must be an exit, he thought. Or was it a huge independent ecosystem? It seemed an unlikely probability, but it was an alien world, so who knew? It widened out the deeper he went, and soon he couldn't see the sides anymore. The suit's heads-up display said the temperature was dropping. Another few meters, and he felt a slight current tug at his feet. He set his buoyancy to neutral and swam around. A larger fish raced past from side to side, confirming what he'd thought. "I'm outside." The pool above was a moon pool like the one in Templemere, which explained the higher pressure. It was holding the water back from flooding the chamber. He reached a hand up and activated the suit's hydrophone. "This is Terry. Can any orca or bottlenose hear me?" He added a couple of low-frequency calls, knowing the sound range carried better in water. He didn't know whether the Selroth or Zictal communicated with ultrasonic underwater clicks. With his reception volume all the way up, he waited. He heard a series of clicks on his hydrophone, then several more. He repeated his call until he heard a reply. "Terry, Terry," came the bottlenose's voice over the hydrophone. "Where are you?" "Can you follow my voice?" "Keep talk, try find." Terry did as he was asked, and kept up a monologue. A minute later, a bottlenose shot into view, arced around him, and came to a stop. He reached out and stroked the dolphin's side. "Hi, Wiki Wiki. Are you okay?" "Wiki Wiki good. Fun mess with crabs. Has anyone else been hurt?" "No more hurt. You say we tease, we tease." "Good." He pointed up into the lava tube. "We're going to move everyone up there. If you follow the tube up, you'll find a big pool and a cave. It'll be safe for a while when they find our submarine. Understand?" Wiki Wiki's head bobbed up and down. "Good. Go tell your pod and the orcas." "Wiki Wiki, tell pod and Dark Killers," she said. "Bye!" She shut off into the darkness and was gone. It was a little disconcerting how often they didn't bother with their harness lights. He guessed they weren't important when you had built-in sonar. With confidence, Wiki Wiki would lead the others back. Terry headed back to the lava tube and ultimately to the others. Chapter 13. Volcanic Lava Tubes, Planet Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Tolo Arm, May 13th, 2038. It took 6 hours of hard work to move everyone and all the equipment down the tunnel and into the pool cavern. Colin and Dan ended up using tools from the sub to fix metal pipes into the tunnel wall, allowing everyone to move up and down much quicker. Still, it was a slow process. Terry had expected difficulty convincing the adults to come down. He needn't have worried. They were too despondent to disagree, merely concerned their children were as safe as possible. They couldn't argue with Terry and his friends, and anyway, the caverns down the lava tubes would be safer. Halfway through the move, the first orcas showed up in the pool and examined the new location. They used their sonar and harness lights to look around, then left to give others a turn. The pool was large enough for several orcas at a time to float there, or most of the bottlenoses. Having the dolphins hanging out in the pool helped the younger children feel better, and when lights were brought down and turned on, the bright colors and intricate stalagmite formations helped more. Then they got to watch Terry and his friends feed an extremely hungry Pokale. All in all, with temporary cots and the lights, the entire situation took on the feel of a camping trip to the kids. "So now what?" Katrina asked after they'd fed Pokale, while Terry checked the tiny autochef they used to make their own food and the milk for the calf. "We wait and see what develops," Terry said. "We have about 5 days of food, then we're limited to what the cetaceans can bring us." "The power won't last much longer," Dan pointed out, "unless we run a line from the sub's fusion plant." "No," Terry said. "We stay isolated to be safe." Before they closed and locked the hatch into the tubes, they'd set a simple radio tripwire in the sub. If it went offline, or someone broke in or destroyed the sub, the vehicle's computer would send a radio pulse letting them know. Terry decided that in 5 days' time they'd consider going back out for a look. "I'm out of my element," he admitted to the other seniors. "We all are," Taiki said. The others nodded in agreement. "All we can do is our best," Katrina said. "Thanks to you, we're still alive," Dan said. So they waited. They kept their normal day-night cycle. Keeping things normal helped everyone, and turning off most of the lights conserved energy. The cavern didn't take much to keep it warm, as the geothermal heat radiating from the floor helped. When Terry woke the second morning, he found Scritch and Wiki Wiki in the pool, talking to a solitary orca. He climbed out of his bedroll and stretched. Nobody else was awake yet. He checked his watch and decided it was close enough to morning, so he quietly walked over to the pool. "What's going on?" he asked. The orca was Maka, a female from the former wandering pod. Next to Pokale, she was the smallest of the orcas, and their equivalent of a late teenager. Even so, she was huge next to the bottlenoses. "Maka think wardens move now," the orca said. "You think we should move? Why, are the aliens near?" "No crabs, no funny things," Scritch assured him. "Then why should we move?" "More space, good heat," Maka said. Terry scratched his head as he tried to understand. The orcas understood that humans needed warmth to survive. It was a little difficult for them to grasp why cold was a problem, as they had evolved to live in Arctic cold with ease. No, Wiki Wiki said. "Too far. Maka, did you find another cave?" "Not like here," Maka said, rolling on her side and looking at the cavern. "Like other place." "Like Templemere?" "Not like. Some different," Scritch said. "When did you find this?" "After you show us here," Wiki Wiki said. "Damn it," Terry thought. "They're naturals at keeping things to themselves. Where is this? How far away?" "Short swim us," Maka said. "Long swim you." Terry looked back at the others. Nobody was awake yet. He decided, "Take me there." He was forced to mostly swim after he donned his dry suit and slipped into the water. The bottlenoses weren't strong enough to tow a human far, and Maka was unfamiliar with the process. The researchers always cautioned him about being towed by an orca unaccustomed to the process, as it was extremely easy for them to injure him. After a few minutes of swimming, he began to wish he had his mini-sub again. With it, he could keep up with the orcas, if not the bottlenoses. Then Moloko and Pokale appeared out of the dark. "Tear!" Pokale said, and nuzzled his head against Terry. "Hi, Pokale. Hi, Moloko." "What Terry do?" Moloko asked. He explained what Maka and the two bottlenoses had said. "Yes, strange place. From now on, when you find something, tell me?" "We would," Moloko said. "Cray now, look." Terry decided not to push the issue. Explaining what was likely a minor point of timing to beings who didn't understand time was inherently difficult. "Can Pokale tow me?" he asked the calf. Yes, Pokale said excitedly, and rolled to offer Terry his dorsal fin. He gratefully grabbed on and was instantly racing through the water, being escorted by orcas and dolphins. They took him down the lava tube toward the outside, then turned. He expected the wall to appear at any second. It didn't. Instead, they angled upward again. The dark water and strange turns had him disoriented, but he was pretty sure they were moving higher than the pool he'd just left behind. He was so busy thinking about such things that he didn't immediately see the light. "What?" he said, looking up at the growing light. For a second, he panicked, afraid they were taking him to the surface. If they did so, he'd die a horrible death, the compressed nitrogen in his bloodstream forming fatal bubbles and causing strokes. But there was no way they could have traveled the 2 kilometers to the surface. The light was the wrong color, too. Then suddenly he was on the surface, Pokale stopping next to him. Terry gawked. He was inside a geodesic dome carved from volcanic rock. He bobbed for at least a minute, his head turning every which way as he took in the surroundings. Intermittent glowing light fixtures provided dim, if sufficient, illumination. The color spectrum was bluish. The pool he floated in was huge, at least 100 meters across, and roughly circular. The floor of the dome was paved in a similar manner to the geometric shapes above in the dome. In addition, several small domed structures were scattered seemingly at random around the space. There was no doubt this was a purposeful structure. It was also obviously not human, and quite warm outside the water. "See? See?" Maka said, her dorsal fin skimming past a few meters away. Pokale was enjoying himself by performing jumps out of the water, making massive splashes. Clearly, he was enjoying the surface of a larger body of water. Having been born on a spaceship, this was a new experience for him. Terry swam over to the nearest edge and found the floor of the pool gently rising up to meet him several meters from the edge. He swam until he was only waist deep, then stood to walk out of the water. His suit began to quickly decrease heat output, and the heads-up said the temperature was 19 degrees. Comfortable. Standing on dry land, he removed his helmet and gloves. The air felt nice. Even a slight breeze brushed his cheek. There's power, he realized, looking up again at the lights, then at the domes, buildings, which all sported a light or two as well. Where's the power coming from, he wondered. Terry checked his laser pistol to be sure it still worked after being submerged. Doc had said the weapons would work in any environment, but he still checked that the power indicator was green, then reholstered the weapon. Nothing about the dome suggested anyone lived in it. Regardless, the hair on the back of his neck kept wanting to stand up. He walked around the perimeter of the moon pool and found himself examining the roof again. What he'd thought were geometric cuts in the rock structure now looked more like steel panels. Some had lights, some didn't. The ones without lights reminded him of something. The memory was tantalizingly just beyond his reach. He walked toward the closest building. "What us do?" Maka asked. Pokale pulled off a full 360-degree backflip in the center of the pool, bouncing off Maka's peduncle. Maka pushed him aside gently with her much bigger fluke. "Can you wait here, please?" Terry asked. "We wait, Terry," Maka agreed. "Wait, wait!" Pokale called and dove deep to jump again. "Thanks," Terry said, and continued on. The first building he came to was one of the smallest, maybe 5 meters tall and about 10 across. It was also the closest to the moon pool. It reminded him of a doghouse style common back on Earth, an igloo for a dog. After he'd walked all the way around, he realized there was no door. He skirted the outside a second time just to be sure he hadn't missed it. "Well, that's strange," he said. His voice echoed slightly until Pokale crashed back into the moon pool. He glanced back toward them to be sure everything was okay, then reached out and touched the building. It felt cool to the touch, maybe 5 degrees lower than the air temperature. He couldn't decide if it was stone or metal. The finish was strange. Slightly discouraged, he moved on to the next building. After a while, he took out his slate and began making notes on the buildings and dome layout. He circled 2 more buildings and found no entrances to them, either. Not even a window or a pipe. He wondered what they were. Certainly not buildings, if they didn't have any way to get in or out. He leaned his slate against a triangular section of the geodesic dome, only to have it and several more slide away and send his slate tumbling inside. "Holy crap!" he barked and backpedaled, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his butt. "Oof!" He sat and gawked, his weapon completely forgotten. As he watched, the interior of the dome lit up. Slowly he got to his feet and cautiously stuck his head inside. He found a series of large machines clustered around the room's center. They were of various heights, with one attached to the roof. Low-intensity lights were fixed around the highest part of the room. He bent and retrieved his slate before walking up to the closest machine. As he came close, a screen came alive on its side, slightly lower than he would find easy to read. Bending over, he examined the display. It was immediately recognizable to him as a power system. He'd seen them on the Teddy Roosevelt during visits to her engine room. He was standing next to a fusion reactor and its associated power generation distribution systems. However, he couldn't read the language. Terry moved his slate so its pickups could see the display. Centering it, he activated the machine translation feature. For such a powerful computer, it took an inordinate amount of time to find a translation matrix. As it began to display in English, he saw untranslated segments. He'd never seen a result of that sort before. A translation either worked or it didn't. This was especially true with mechanical and technological devices. After examining the various readings for a moment, he went into the slate's translation program and inquired what language the machines were using. Karaman was the answer. "Never heard of them," he said, and shrugged. He'd read up on them later and maybe find out why there was an incomplete translation matrix. He could see the power generator was operating on minimum, though he couldn't see how much fuel it had or its F11 condition. It could be there, but he didn't know how to find it. One of the displays read thermal tap. He wondered if that was like geothermal power. Maybe the base was running off lava under the core. Is that what the Selroth are looking for? He wondered. It was clearly an old base built into a volcano. Even rich and powerful alien races wouldn't go to these sorts of extremes, building a base kilometers under the ice on a remote moon, unless they had a plan. From what he knew about the Islians, it didn't look like something they'd build either. Terry went around looking at the various machines, mostly guessing at their functions, before walking back out the entrance. The triangular sections of the dome's walls that had moved to make a door returned silently to their original position, creating a seamless wall once more. He leaned in closely to examine the sections that made up the doorway and eventually found what distinguished them from all the other sections. One triangular section had a nearly invisible green outline, and it was the one he'd leaned his slate against. He touched the section and the door instantly opened again. Out of curiosity, he went inside the dome and found where it folded against the inside. He touched it, and the door closed. "Yes," he said. Another touch of the trigger from the inside, and the door quickly folded open. Armed with the knowledge, he returned to the first dome and searched for a green outlined section. When he found it, he opened the door and looked inside. It looked like a series of water or air pumps and other such equipment. Since his suit said the pressure was higher in the dome, that only made sense. He went to the other buildings, looking inside and making notes in his slate. The more he scrutinized, the surer he was that the dome was a serious installation, and it had been empty for an extremely long time. Then he opened a building and stood in shock. "Those have to be weapons," Terry said. The dome was lower and squatter than all the others, shaped more like a hot dog bun than a regular dome. Inside was a large machine and racks upon racks of weapons. After seeing pictures of various guns during MST back on Molokai, he was certain. In addition, they were like the guns Doc had talked about. They were unconfigured. He examined the machine in the center, which, like the power plant, came alive as soon as he walked up to it. Since his slate was already configured for the strange Karaman language, he held up the computer and examined the display. "Manufactory ready." "Holy shit," he said, walking along the racks of weapons. They were stored in groupings by type, though he couldn't tell what type many of them were. Another rack had stacks of plates. He picked one up and examined it. The material was semi-rigid and as light as plastic. The only markings were the Union common numbers and what he guessed was a part or serial number. He had no idea what they might be for. The door closed behind him as he left and moved to another building. Once inside, he found 6 blocky structures mounted to the floor, and one hanging from the ceiling, which ended at the height of all the screens on other machines he'd seen. Like the other machines, it came alive as soon as he walked up to it. He used his slate to translate. "Computing and communications." "Now we're talking," he said, and linked his slate with the controller. Immediately, a data packet began to flood in, and it was the strange 3D data. He let out an awkward squeak and quickly made sure it wasn't going straight into open memory. It wasn't, thankfully. He knew from experience that it was too complicated to do anything with, so he ignored it and tried to examine the systems. They were far more complicated than anything he'd ever seen before. "Whoever created the 3D programming obviously wrote this OS, too," he said after a few minutes. He couldn't get past the operating system to the core controls of the computer, so he settled for seeing what kind of systems the computer was overseeing. It only took a minute to realize the big blocky machines were core memory modules. Unbelievably huge ones. What could possibly need this much space, he wondered. Then he remembered how massive the 3D data packets were. If the entire system had been written with it, they must consume hundreds of exabytes, maybe thousands of exabytes, which would be zettabytes. The idea of the system needing zettabytes of space to store the strange data went out the window. There was simply no way. As he understood, the entire GalNet was only 1 or 2 zettabytes. Maybe if you added all the associated data, you'd maybe double the total. Maybe. Then he found out how to access the communications system. He used it to access the frequencies he and his friends had been using. "Anyone out there?" "Terry," Katrina answered immediately. "Where are you? When we woke up, you were gone." She sounded almost frantic. "I'm fine," he explained. "The cetaceans found another cavern. It's artificial, a base of some kind. I'll send a wiki to come get you, and you can see for yourself." That's the end of chapter 13, my friends. We will finish this book in a few days, with chapters 14 through 16 and the epilogue. That's the word, epilogue. Anyway, we thank you for taking your time to hang out with us. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share. See you in a few days. Bye!